Thank you. Appreciate that very much. Remember, joelrosenberg.com, allisrael.com, One for Israel. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. Yep. Lots happening. Yeah, we live in an incredible age of information. Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that. All right, let's move on ahead. How many of you are familiar with or even have this app, Literal Word? Okay, it's a super easy app to have. You don't have to know a stitch of Greek or Hebrew to use this app. Check it out. My wife uses it when we have devotions together in the morning. She has her Literal Word app open, and she can trace a word there, find out where it's used in the Scriptures. I mentioned this last semester when we were talking about book 1 of the book of Psalms. I would encourage you to check it out if you don't have anything like that, because it's easy to use and it does give you a really, really good idea as to how God has used a particular word or idea in a variety of passages in the New or Old Testament. So I just put that up there for your perusal to check it out. All right, we are ready for book 2. Book 2 is communication. Who is communicating with whom? I don't hear much communication. God and the king are communicating with, specifically, not exclusively, but in general, with whom? The nations. Remember that the name Elohim appears a whole lot more than Yahweh or Jehovah, because the emphasis of book 2 is going to be on God and his king, or through his king, the Messiah, communicating his message to the nations of the world. All right. And so we are going to meet a group of individuals known as the sons of Korah, and I do want to give you some background information on them, because understanding something of the history of these guys will contribute to our understanding of what they write, okay? And in addition to these first 8 Psalms, they also write 4 others near the end of book 3, okay, as you see there, 84, 5, 7, and 8. And yes, I do know how to count, but there are 2 Psalms, 86 and 89, that are actually written by David that are intermingled, and we'll talk about that when we get there. We see another grouping of Davidic Psalms here. Remember, we talked about 4 collections of Davidic Psalms in the Psalter. Well, this is the second one, 51 to 71. And then we're going to meet a man named Asaph. Okay, another individual of whom relatively little is known, but he is an important figure and has quite a contribution to make. Right here, he's only contributing to 1 psalm in book 2, but we'll see in book 3 that he really comes to life. He's going to contribute 11 psalms, 73 to 83 at the beginning of book 3. And then, good old King Solomon, the last psalm of book 2. And he writes another one. Does anybody happen to remember what that other psalm is that he writes? It's a fairly familiar psalm. Has something to do with family and that sort of thing. Except the Lord build the house. That's Psalm 127. And that's 127 and 128 are often studied together. He wrote Psalm 127. So there's a mixture of authors here in book 2. And then just a snapshot of book 3 here. The entirety of book 3 is Asaph and the sons of Korah. Asaph, who writes 1 psalm in book 2, will write 11 in book 3. Then the sons of Korah will contribute near the end of the book there. So we should try to get to know these guys as much as we can. So tell me what you know about the sons of Korah. When you hear that group, what comes to your mind? Yeah, as in how horrible? What happens? You're right. Okay. Now, Nadab and Abihu did that, but and they were destroyed. But in the account of the sons of Korah, I may be wrong. I don't remember it saying that they specifically did that. They did rebel against somebody's authority. Whose authority was it? I mean, it's God's, but through whom? They were challenging the authority of Moses. Did anybody else do that in the Old Testament? Remember, Aaron and Miriam themselves challenged his authority, right? But in this case, they challenged his authority, and Jake, what happened? Yeah, the earth opened its mouth, and they were swallowed up by the earth. Yeah, crazy story. The only one of its kind in the Old Testament. So let's take a look at these guys. They're sons of Levi, okay? And I don't know what you think of genealogy. Some of you think, oh, that's really cool. Others don't. If you study Islam at all, you probably ought to be familiar with genealogies. They absolutely love them. They're very important. But they're also important to the people of Israel because the genealogies have a lot to do with who the Messiah is and the inheritance that God has promised his people. Who are the three sons of Levi? They're big names. Yeah? Yeah. Good. Merari and Kohath and? Yeah. Good. I like it. We're going to focus on Kohath because he's the one that has something to do with these guys we're talking about. He had three sons named Amram. Now, that's a name we all know, right? Izhar, not so much, and Hebron, not so much. Okay, but I want to focus on his sons, Amram and Izhar. Who's the son of Amram? Moses and Aaron and Miriam. Yeah, at least, right? We'll focus on, and Izhar had a son whose name was, Korah. And that makes Korah and Moses cousins. Interesting. Now remember, Moses takes off after he murders an Egyptian, and he's gone for how long? 40 years, and then the burning bush experience, and he comes back, right? But the other family members have been there. They've grown up, they've stayed in Egypt, okay? We don't know exactly what it was that Korah and his followers did not like about Moses. They challenged his authority, and probably the best way to say it is that they didn't like the portion that they received when it came to the service in the tabernacle. They felt that they deserved something more, okay? We simply aren't told exactly what it is that they didn't like. But most likely, Korah and his family were very influential, being related as they were to the Levites and their closeness to Moses and all of that, okay? And Korah has three sons, and their names are given there, and the book of Exodus refers to these three as the clans of the Korahites, okay? So Korahites refers to the descendants of Korah himself, all right? So just to give you a little bit of background on who he is. Now, a couple of passages from the narrative in Numbers. Numbers 16 says, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households and all the people who belonged to Korah and all their goods. Okay? Well, if that's what happened, then how do you end up with sons of Korah later on? If they're all swallowed up, then, did the earth regurgitate them? Or some of them? How do we explain the fact that there are sons of Korah who lived to write psalms if they were swallowed up by the earth in Numbers 16? That's a tough one. We get a little help from the genealogy that comes 10 chapters later in Numbers 26. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up together with Korah when that company died, when the fire devoured 250 men, and they became a warning. But the sons of Korah did not die. And there are some guys that get so worked up about this, they say, well, that was probably interpolated after. Some scribe added that in later on just to somehow, make a bridge from there to the sons of Korah. But there is a better way to explain that. That little phrase, belonged to, is just one single little letter, and it's a preposition that functions a lot like our preposition to. When Numbers 16 says that those who belong to Korah were swallowed up, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's referring to all of the biological descendants of Korah. It could be referring to those who belonged to Korah in his rebellion against Moses. Now, I can't prove to you that that's what it's saying, but it does get us out of a bit of a difficult situation. And so if those who belong to Korah in Numbers 16 are referring to those who joined the rebellion, then we're left to assume that his sons, and we have no idea how old they were at the time, but his sons, for whatever reason, did not go forth with him in the rebellion against Moses. They were spared, perhaps through the mediation of some other family member. We simply do not know. All we know is they didn't die, because the inspired text 10 chapters later tells us as much. That makes sense to everybody? Just trying to give you a little background on these guys, because we read about the sons of Korah in the Psalms, but we don't do a lot of investigation, and there's not a whole lot there, but this much does help us. I want to make one other comparison here between Korah and another man you all know very well, Elisha. Why this comparison? Because there are some interesting associations between these two guys that, at the very least, facilitate our ability to remember where we find the Psalms of the sons of Korah. Remember, there were boys that taunted Elisha, calling him Baldy. Well, the name Korah is from the same root, bald. In fact, in the book of Leviticus, when the instructions are given about leprosy, and it says if somebody's hair falls out, now don't think I have leprosy, okay, but when somebody's hair falls out and he's bald, that's the same word that's used, the same root for Korah, okay? And so these guys are calling him Baldy, 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 and I don't think these boys are thinking about Korah at all. I'm simply telling you that the two words are related. And they're telling him to go up and to the temple of Baal and to worship there. And then you know what happens, right? The bears come and they kill 42 of the boys. There were other boys apparently, but 42 of them are killed. And the first Sons of Korah psalm is Psalm 42. Now, I am not trying to tell you that the organizers of the Psalter purposely used this passage in the story of Elisha in order to place the first psalm of the sons of Korah where it is in Psalm 42. I'm not saying, it's possible. All I'm saying is this is another way to help us remember where to find it in Book 2, all right? But there are a couple of other things that are cool when it comes to the association of these two. Psalm 84 is 42 psalms after that. So you have Psalm 42 and then Psalm 84 in Book 3, and that begins the second group of Korahite psalms there at the end of Book 3. So if you put these two stories together, you have some interesting associations, at least facilitate your ability to remember where to find these psalms. And don't forget that one of the purposes of the organizers in putting the Psalter together was exactly that, to help people to know where to find psalms and how they were grouped together. All right? Another interesting point is that both Elisha and the sons of Korah settled in the northern area of Ephraim and Manasseh up there in the northern, what became the northern kingdom from the same area. And a practical application, the boys' disregard for Elisha, those 42 who were killed, echoes Korah's disregard for the leadership of Moses. And so there are some interesting insights here that we find. And again, I'm not trying to prove that this is what motivated them to place the first Korahite psalm where it is in Psalm 42. But I hope that at least it's helpful and it'll give you something to facilitate memory. Questions or comments about that? Does that make sense? I just thought it was interesting. All right. So let's jump in. The first two, 42 and 43, probably go together. Most likely, these two psalms were either written as one psalm and later divided, or they were written as two psalms that were intended to go together. Either one of those is legit. So 42 and 43 really talk about a personal struggle of somebody against a particular enemy. Let me just pause to say this. Remember last week when we talked about the little phrase of David or of Asaph? We made the comment that normally that means that that's the person that wrote it, but not necessarily. We can't insist on that in every situation. There are some individuals who believe that in the case of the Psalms of the sons of Korah, for example, the of Korah could refer to the fact that these psalms were written for them to perform, for them to sing. I'm just making you aware of that. That's not the typical overarching way that preposition is used. And the reason I say that, for one thing, is Charles Spurgeon, for example, who wrote that huge collection on the Psalms, beautiful, beautiful work. he takes the position that David is actually the writer of Psalm 42, and that David wrote that psalm in order for the sons of Korah to perform it in the temple, okay? So I'm just telling you that is an option out there. And remember also that David is the one who actually appointed the sons of Korah to be musical leaders in the temple worship. So David and Korah had a very, very close relationship. There are a couple of passages in the Old Testament that actually name them together. David and Korah, stipulated this and that. So the sons of Korah were very important in the establishment of the rituals, the musical worship rituals in the temple. All right, then you got Psalm 44, which is more of a corporate crying out. There are many enemies apparently in that psalm, and so you can see one of them is more personal and individual struggling, and the other one is more corporate, probably the nation struggling. All right, so when were these written? Well, I don't know, but here's some possibilities. Some say during the time of David, because he's the one that established them, so it does make sense they could have written during his time. The time of Hezekiah also mentions the sons of Korah in a passage or two. The time of Josiah, when he was doing that reform of the temple worship, remember the law was discovered, and there was a huge reform going on in Israel at that time before he died. Then everything fell apart again. Their family is mentioned there as well. And then after the Babylonian exile, they're mentioned once again. And so it is, don't think that all of these psalms had to be written by the same group of individuals, the same generation, let's say, of the sons of Korah. It's possible that several generations of the descendants of Korah were involved in writing these psalms. Okay, it doesn't, we simply don't know. But there are some interesting things that we'll see in these psalms that reflect the experience that we read about, Jake, in Numbers 16. It was so horrible. I've highlighted 43:1 just because I don't think it's difficult to see how these two go together. There are three refrains that are identical in these two psalms. So you put the two together, Psalm 42 contains the first two refrains, and Psalm 42 and 3 the second two. I'm going to read the entire psalm for you because my wife told me I needed to. No, she didn't. But she has suggested several times that maybe it'd be nice to read the psalms before we study them. So I'm going to read this to you. It's fairly short. As a deer pants for the flowing streams, so pants my soul for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? My tears have been my food day and night, while they say to me all the day long, where is your God? These things I remember as I pour out my soul, how I would go with the throng and lead them in procession to the house of God with glad shouts and songs of praise, a multitude keeping festival. Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God. My soul is cast down within me. Therefore I remember you from the land of Jordan and of Hermon, from Mount Mizar. Deep calls to deep at the roar of your waterfalls. All your breakers and your waves have gone over me. By day the Lord commands his steadfast love, and at night his song is with me, a prayer to the God of my life. I say to God, my rock, why have you forsaken me? Why do I go mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? As with a deadly wound in my bones, my adversaries taunt me, while they say to me all the day long, where is your God? Why are you cast down, O my soul, and why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God. Vindicate me, O God. Defend my cause against an ungodly people. From the deceitful and unjust man, deliver me. For you are the God in whom I take refuge. Why have you forsaken me? Why do I go about mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? Send out your light and your truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring me to your holy hill and to your dwelling. Then I will go to the altar of God, to God my exceeding joy, and I will praise you with the lyre, O God, my God. Oh, why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you in turmoil within me? hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God. You ever hear of a bipolar person? Does that sound a little bipolar to you? Oh, I'm going to hope in God. Why are you canceling? Oh, God, I'm going to be, oh. And that's just, it bounces all back and forth all over the place. And I won't ask for a raise of hands. I could probably ask how many of you have never experienced that before, and I'm pretty sure nobody would raise his hand, right? I mean, this is a case of a guy that's up and down and back and forth and all over the place because he knows the truth, and he's clinging to that truth, or at least trying to, but at the same time, he's aware of something very real that's happening in his life, and he's asking the question, what is going on here? How does this relate to that? You ever been there before? If you have, this is a great psalm for you to keep in mind. All right? These guys are real. They struggled in real ways. Thank my wife. She's the one that told me to do it. Well, she didn't tell me because she's submissive. But she told me what might happen if I don't. She wouldn't make me coffee the next morning. So I made it myself. That's the way it goes. Thank you, Luke. I want to call attention to a phrase here that appears in all three of these refrains. My salvation and my God, my salvation and my God, my salvation and my God. Okay? Does somebody here have access like to the King James that could read that last phrase for us? There are others. NASB, I think, also, I can't remember for sure. Somebody have one of those there you could read to us? Do you have it there? Sure, New King James, I think, is the same. Yeah, the health of my countenance and my God. King James, New King James, and there are some other versions as well. And I looked at that and said, okay, these aren't the same. Why does the ESV translate that my salvation, my God? Two things, right? My salvation and my God. And the King James and some others include three elements here. The health of my countenance and my God. The fact is, the Hebrew text has three words in it. But ESV and I think Holman and most of the others will translate with those two words, my salvation, my God. So what's going on here? The Hebrew word for salvation in the Old Testament can mean spiritual salvation, but it is also a word that signifies wholeness or completeness. Keep in mind what happened at the fall. What did we lose at the fall? You say, Mark, what didn't we lose? What does Romans 3:23 tell us that we lost at the fall? Yeah, we lost our ability to be reflectors of the glory of God, which is the very purpose for which we were created, right? We lost that and all that goes with that, okay? When we come to Christ, we are made whole. That's an aspect of salvation that is so precious to us. We are complete in him, Colossians chapter 2, right? And so everything that we lost and we're lacking has been restored through Christ. It will be lived out in us in perfection only when we're glorified someday, but we're heading in that direction now. So part of becoming like Christ now through the trials that we face, like he's facing, okay, is so that God might cause the completeness that we already have positionally in Christ to come out in our lives as we walk with him day by day. It's a really beautiful thing to keep in mind. And so the ESV and others kind of put those two ideas together. Oh, I'm sorry, that's one of them. That's the idea of the health, the word health. But the word that doesn't appear in the English translation here in the ESV is the word countenance, or it's the word face. It's just the basic word for face in Hebrew. It can mean presence, it can mean to be before, but it's the idea of being face to face with somebody, okay? And that's what is brought out more clearly in a translation like the King James or New King James. I personally wish that other translations would include it as well, because one of the things we have to keep in mind is that we're talking here about honor, shame cultures, right? We talked about that in the past. This part of the world and most of the world today is an honor, shame mentality. Sin is basically being dishonored or bringing dishonor on somebody else. That's an oversimplification, but that's largely how they view evil and sin. So when Adam sinned in the garden, what did he do? He brought shame on himself and, in a sense, at least attempted to bring shame on the very God who created him. Right? And so the idea of being saved here, including that Hebrew word for face, is being made whole in the sense of my face now being lifted up so that I am restored to fellowship in the presence of my God, before my God. See, that's what he's after. And how many of us as Christians have wrestled with that? This whole idea of I can't come to God, I've done so many things wrong, I've been so, and you just feel like your face belongs right here. And the writer understands it. He's been taunted by that, by his enemies, and yet he recognizes that his God has lifted his face and restored his honor. And our honor has been restored to us not by our works, but through the finished work of Jesus Christ. It's a beautiful, beautiful thought. So, again, I'm not opposed to the translation in the ESV. I think it lacks something, an element there that would add a little bit of richness if it would include the word face or the presence of or before God. Questions, comments about that? Does it make sense to you? Yeah. We use terminology like that. We say, so-and-so wants to save face, right? So saving face means what? It means avoiding shaming somebody else or being shamed personally. All right. Notice at the beginning here, he says, when shall I come and what? Appear before God. And the same word face that appears in these three refrains is also used in this phrase right here. So 4 times the word face actually appears in this psalm. See, that's another reason why I think it'd be really cool if more translations would include the idea of face or presence or being before. Now, what is the occasion here? As I read this and described what was going on, what comes to your mind? What may possibly have been an occasion that would incite this psalm? Well, let's go with Spurgeon for a second. Let's say David wrote it for the sons of Korah to sing. What might be the occasion here? Yeah, some say, I think the Spurgeon, may have actually suggested that. I have to go back and double check. That it may actually be another iteration of David fleeing from Absalom. Do you remember the first psalm we read that talks about David fleeing from Absalom? Way back at the beginning? Which psalm was that? What are the gateway psalms? 1 and 2, right? And as soon as you get out of the gate, you come to Psalm 3, and that is a description of David fleeing from Absalom. And then Psalm 63 is another case where it appears that he's talking about his flight from Absalom. And some have suggested that this one also might be. What's another possibility? Thinking more in terms of the group and not of an individual, what might be the occasion here? Enemies, people taunting him. Here, let's move on. Think about it and scream out when you there. When shall I enter and see the face of God? Literally, be another way of translating that. Okay, it's very personal. My, I, me. Okay, lots of. In fact, one guy suggested that these psalms, sons of Korah, were composed not for general use by the laity, but for the singer's own presentation. He says that in that culture, if somebody wrote that personally, using the first person singular, probably it would be used for his own use to express as a solo this song. Now, do we do that today? Yeah, but give me an example of a song that we sing where we use the first person, but we sing it congregationally. Just as I am. Good. What's another one? I will serve thee because I love thee. Right? I will sing of the mercies of the Lord forever. So in fact, I think I heard in practice this morning a song that we're going to sing in church that is in the first person, if I remember right. but we'll sing it congregationally. So we don't follow that nearly as closely. People will write songs to sing sometimes as a solo, and then they're published and they're used congregationally. So but he claims that was more of a tendency in that culture. So, that doesn't prove that that's what's going on here. All right, he's panting. That word pant is only used one other time in the Old Testament. It's in Joel 1:20. Do you remember what Joel is talking about, the prophet Joel? If you took Old Testament survey sometime along the way in your life, what's the theme of the book of Joel? I won't point out any former faith students. The day of the Lord. Are you a former faith? Oh, no. Okay, Alan. The day of the Lord. Yeah, the events going on during that tumultuous period of time in the future. The beasts of the field pant for you because the water brooks are dried up. And we don't know exactly why the deer was panting. It's possible it's because it's taking place in a setting when the streams are dried up. It's perhaps a time of year when certain streams are not flowing because it's not the rainy season. It's also possible the deer can't get to the water brooks because there's an impending danger, a predator of some sort separating him from the water brooks. And so some have suggested that word pant actually means more than just, I'm thirsty. But it actually is a howling of the beast, howling for God to provide a way for him to get to the water. And the psalmist howling, as I tried to practically howl reading the psalm to you this morning, to express what was going on in the heart of the psalmist. Can I say this? And I say this, I'll use the word howl, I mean it respectfully. I really believe that somewhere along the way in every one of our lives as believers, God allows us to come to a point where we learn how to howl. Are you with me on that? We read about people crying out to God. But I really believe that God sometimes allows that to happen in our lives because he wants to teach us what it means to howl, to truly cry out to him. And some of you have been there, and some of you will be there, some of us. Okay? And whatever that situation is, the deer panting may be more than just being thirsty, but actually crying out to the Creator to open up a way to the water brooks. There's the appearing before God. I would go with a throng to the house of God. He uses this wildlife illustration here. The deer is panting. And 42 Psalms later, right, in Psalm 84, he uses another wildlife illustration. Even the sparrow finds a home and the swallow a nest. It's almost like he's jealous of these birds. In Psalm 84, the psalm was also longing and fainting for the courts of the Lord. There's some impediment there as well. And he thinks about the sparrow and the swallow. Man, they've gone right in there boldly, and they've set up their nests right by the altar of the Lord. Man, must be nice. I'd love to be a sparrow right about now. See, that's the idea. Then back to Psalm 42, down in verse 4, he says, I remember these things, how I would go and lead the throng in procession to the house of God. And in Psalm 84, down in verse 10, he says, I'd rather be, a day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere. I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. Now, some of you serve as greeters here, and that's an awesome ministry, and we appreciate the work you do. That's not exactly what he's talking about here. A doorkeeper was a specific and very privileged position among certain Levites. If you go back to 1 Chronicles 9, Shallum, the son of Korah, and there are others in the line there that I omitted, and his kinsmen of his father's house, the Korahites, were in charge of the work of the service, keepers of the thresholds of the tent, as their fathers had been in charge of the camp of the Lord, keepers of the entrance. He's describing a specific responsibility, high privilege given to certain Levites. Some have suggested that maybe this is what Korah was rebelling against. He didn't like the idea of having this position. He wanted to be one of those who offered the sacrifices, because for him that was more prestigious than being a doorkeeper, working the threshold or the entrance. Okay, so we don't know, but it's a possibility. I also added 1 Chronicles 6:33. Can you think of a very important individual in the Old Testament where just something is said? He lived in the proximities of the tabernacle, and he actually functioned to a degree in this capacity. Pastor Sean has mentioned him in his series, part of the series in 1 Samuel. Oops. I think I just gave his name away. Samuel. Do you remember what happened after he had his vision? The Bible says he woke up the next morning, and what did he do? And we sometimes just kind of read over this. He woke up and he opened the doors of the tabernacle. Interesting. And he's actually mentioned as a descendant of Korah. I did not know that. Samuel himself was a descendant of the sons of Korah. And he functioned, at least to some degree, in that way by opening the doors of the tabernacle. And they would make sure that everything was ready, that there were no impurities in there, that nobody who was disqualified could enter, and all that. You think of the tomb of the unknown soldier, the guy that guards that tomb. Extremely prestigious privilege that person has. It's probably not a worthy comparison, but it has something to do with that. Okay, and then I'll end with. Can you advance one more? For some reason, this isn't advanced. There it goes. The gatekeepers, says one guy, were Levites stationed at the gates of God's house. It was their task to open the temple gates in the morning, close them again at night. They stood ready to receive the tithes and gifts that the Israelites brought. They stood watch over the storerooms and the treasuries to make sure that nothing was stolen. They stood on guard to make sure that no unclean person would enter God's house. So our time is gone, but I just wanted to give you some background, try to tie it in with what the writer was saying. We'll come back and finish that next time around, Lord willing. All right, thank you very much.